because they hadn't named her. Her birth mother was leaving, and she wanted the adoptive parents to have the opportunity to name Stephanie. So, so I said to Steve, he said, well, what do you think? You know, name, what do you want to do? So
We had not prepared for a name
I mean,
at
this
all.
is
We had
out of the blue.
no idea at that point.
So I had said to him, well, I had always thought if we had a little girl, I'd like to name her Stephanie, after Steph. And so
This is, by the way, this is the first time that I've heard this from Mary. So I was taken aback immediately, and of course I was honored. I mean, I was just extremely proud that Mary would even say that.
So you didn't object
I
to
did
veto
not
that
object
one?
at all.
No.
No, not at all.
hung up the phone rang again. So now it's another social worker. She's at the hospital. Do you have a name? I'm like, we haven't even like officially decided what we're doing. This is like 10 minutes into the conversation. She said, well, I need a name. You can name her, somebody else can name her. So I gave them the name. I went to my staff meeting, trying to be calm. I was sitting there.
But when you walked in like 3 inches off the floor, they must have suspected something.
They were funny because afterwards they did say there was something going on because I was just in another world. And it was interesting because a couple of the guys took me to lunch, and both had very heart-to-heart conversations with me, saying, don't worry about your age, it's the best thing we ever did, go for it. So I left work, we went up to the hospital, and the nurses were wonderful. They had
Very
Stephanie
nice.
in her little cart, and they rolled her into a room, closed the door, and said, here you are.
We spent 3 hours with Stephanie, just the two of us with Stephanie in this room, no one else in the room, and I'll always remember those 3 hours. It was just so special, and that is what, even though we had just about decided, had made a decision at that point, that by far just
it's like 12 years of
took any question out of our
heartache.
minds.
Well, it wasn't 12 years of heartache, but it was great, 12 years. But still, I mean, there was this 12 years of waiting, and all of a sudden it was just washed away, this little baby. They wanted us to take her home the next day. This was Thursday, can you take her home tomorrow? I'm like, I don't have a thing. I mean, she'll sleep in the bottom dresser drawer or a box. So we drove home, and on the way home, my mind is clicking. Made a whole series of phone calls. My neighbors were wonderful. Women across, we had car seats, we had bottles, we had clothes, we had bassinets. We had everything Friday afternoon when we came home from work. Now, meanwhile, we called the hospital Friday morning and said, can you just keep her till Saturday so that we can at least get everything ready? And they
You weren't
did.
worried that they'd changed their mind?
Oh, no, because they were going to put her in
This was-
foster care. They
Oh,
said, don't
so it
worry,
was
we'll put her in a foster
foster
home
care,
for
okay.
like a month until you get
For
your acts
2 or 3
together.
days or a week, and we said,
No way.
just all we're asking is just 2 days, 1 day. That's all we're
Just to
asking.
sort of-
Could you just
First I'll get out of
give us that
shock,
one
and
day.
then second of all, to sort of get
I
things
just
in
needed
order.
clothes and food for the child, you know. So, as I said, my neighbors were wonderful. Some women that I worked with, everybody was just, it was unbelievable, the support that we got. Now, I was very naive. I figured I said to my boss, all right, we're picking her up on Saturday. I'll be in on Monday. I had a whole slew of women volunteering to watch this child. And anyway, I brought her home. We brought her home Saturday, and I knew there was no way I was going back to work for a while. And then the story goes on, you know.
Well,
we've learned.
you did have 1 week.
I had a couple of weeks, yeah. But,
You
you know, that
know,
was kind
I
of
want
it.
to, before we go too far, we've talked a bit about Stephanie, and I'd love to have you show some pictures
Oh,
so that those who are watching can kind of see this little girl that we're talking about.
okay.
And tell the story, too, a little
Picture
bit.
here.
This is a...
There we go. Over here.
Okay. All right. This is a picture these pictures were taken by our neighbor across the street who was a professional photographer, and this was taken the afternoon that we brought Stephanie home. If you can see, I look half asleep because I think I got maybe 3 hours sleep the night before. I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I brought her home. Called the hospital 3 times to get instructions on what to do with this child.
I thought
Stephanie's
you
a
were
little bit
such an
over
expert
2.
mother when I saw you in the office with Steph.
Well, by Sunday night, I realized that I better get a pediatrician because the nursery at the hospital was getting tired of hearing from me. And luckily, one of Dr. Harding's nurses lives up the street, and so she helped. But this is Stephanie when we brought her home. 3 days old at this point.
2 to 3 days old at this point.
Any more?
Sure,
Okay.
all of them.
Okay. This is Stephanie at 3 months. This was her christening picture that we took. And this last picture is a special picture for us. We keep it in our family room, and this is a picture of Stephanie with Mom and Dad and Judge Moynihan, who presided at the adoption finalization in May. I think it was May
May 29th.
of 83. It was the year after she came home to us. So this is her adoption picture. And then we have one more picture that Steph will show you. And this is the family 2.5 years later. We're kind of like, we know what we're doing now.
Sort of.
That is beautiful.
this way.
That is beautiful, and it's appropriate because we're in spring and
That's right.
some nice green grass.
Okay.
I'd like to also mention, Doctor, that in all of the 12 years leading up to the adoption, although we discussed adoption between us often, very often, we weren't always at the same point of development with the idea of adoption. And I think this is important only because both of us had to eventually reach that goal. I originally was somewhat naive and came from the generation that you marry, you have children, and you don't worry about not being able to have children. And that was the way I was thinking much along the way, well into our relationship, into our marriage. And I always had the thought of, when you have your own biological children, you can leave something of you to carry on. Well, when you can't have your own biological children, that major point suddenly is missing. It took me a while to think about what other qualities do individuals have. And I came to the conclusion that physical qualities that you can pass on through children is only part of what you can pass on. And I started to think about what other qualities are there that I could pass on. And I started thinking about morals, ethical values like honesty, sincerity, kindness, caring, all of these things that might sound a little bit boring, but actually they became more and more important to me. And I actually worked myself to that conclusion that those are very important for any child. And I felt that I could pass those on to Stephanie. And hopefully I will be able to do that.
You know, that's powerful. And I've sort of, I suppose, evolved into a similar position in terms of what I do, in terms of working with parents and children as a pediatrician and being the father of our own 4 kids. About, you know, I think we start out a little bit, me, in life, you know, we want to live forever, maybe through our children. You know, I think it's a little bit hard for us when we're younger to accept it, like, at a point in time, we're off this earth and nothing left of us on this earth, perhaps, except photographs or if we've written something or people remember. But I think your idea now is exactly mine about, you know, I want to do something for the children in this world. And I think we are obliged to, while we're here, to do what we can to make this better. The earth, the children, to share what we have, to give, not, you know, what can I get? And particularly this day and age, this me, what's in it for me? You know, what can we give? What can we do? How can we help? You know, and to take a child and to put things in there that will lead them to hopefully having the same idea when they're adults. And what a wonderful world if everybody of all ages was kind of into this. What can we do? You know, John Kennedy's don't ask what you can do for yourself, but for your country or for the world. And I think that is so powerful, what you've just said. You know, it's. I wanted to. I know we'll run out of time soon, and we always sort of have this 1-hour show that we try to squeeze into a half an hour. But there is some exciting news, I think, for foster children, and for adoptive parents-to-be, who you mentioned going once you had made the decision and the agonizing standing in the queue and waiting, years, that Governor Weld has put together a task force, and someone from Worcester, Aaron Lazarus, the chancellor at the medical school, is going to head up the task force, and they're going to reevaluate the laws and regulations of adoption and try to speed it up. There are things like the absentee father who has to give consent and they can't find him and he's uninvolved, and all of these things slow down. In the meantime, these infants and children are in this foster care system missing what Stephanie had from the beginning. And it is important to, to squander a year of a child's life, or 3 years or 5 years, and then for sure, at the moment, it gets harder to place an older child because parents want babies. That's the most popular. There were 60,000 babies, infants and children, adopted in the United States in 1989, which is the last statistics that I could get. And 25,000 of them were babies, and that was no problem. But there were 36,000 older children, black children, handicapped children waiting in the wings. And of that 36,000, only about 13,500 were adopted in that year, 1989. So you can see the problem.
Yes.
We're down to our last couple of minutes, and I had wanted to, mention things like the changes in your life before and after, and I think that's probably obvious. Those were going to be humorous, but
We
I
don't
think
sleep.
you don't sleep. That's a biggie.
You don't sleep.
And you said something, and another thing I wanted to say is, well, how and when to tell Stephanie that she's adopted. And you already said the best thing to me, and if you don't mind, I'll just say it, how she asked you, she's not quite 3, and she had asked you, she had seen something somewhere in a magazine or in TV about a pregnant mother and the big tummy, and she asked you if, was she in your tummy or something, and you said, no, you were in my heart. I carried you in my heart. And I think that's like the 4 birthdays that adopted children have. I think that they're carried in their biological mother and father's heart, I hope forever. They're carried in your hearts forever. They've got 4 hearts to be carried in instead of just 2. You really have 4 parents' hearts to be carried in. And we're down to the end, and this is like the worst we've ever done for covering the whole, but it's also the best we've ever done. And I want to thank you very much for being on the program. And
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I want to thank the young mother who was courageous and wanted to do what was best for Stephanie. And it's so courageous what she did, and so generous. And I want to thank her, and I want to thank all the mothers that do this. Thank you.
Okay.